With so many films out there today following a similar scary movie formula, it's not uncommon to be able to guess a film's ending way before you get there. This can mean that you're left with that disappointing feeling that you had it all figured out way before the payoff, and where's the fun in that? It's not all bad though. There are certain films that reveal just enough at just the right times, whether that's foreshadowing that you don't know is foreshadowing, or a particular detail that you hadn't noticed in time to make the connection. There are some filmmakers that do their reveals just right. Maybe you could piece together the clues along the way and then feel the ultimate satisfaction at the end when you've cracked the code. Or maybe the ending reveal suddenly allows you to connect all the dots and see that you've been drip-fed the information all along. It takes a talented filmmaker and a well-paced plot to pull it off, but there's certainly a few films out there that have turned their foreshadowing into an art. With this in mind, I'm Amy from What Culture, and here's 8 horror movies that give away their own endings. 8. Saw. Starting off strong, we have Saw, a film with one frustratingly obvious piece of evidence that gives away our big killer reveal long before we find out for sure. This first installment to the now huge franchise centers around 2 men and a corpse. As the men, Gordon and Adam, try to escape a locked room to save themselves and, in one man's case, save his family, they realize that their capture has been at the hands of the notorious Jigsaw killer. We then get a little flashback to 5 months earlier. Gordon is discussing the case of terminal brain cancer being suffered by his patient, John Kramer. For a brief moment, we see a shot of Kramer lying semi-conscious in his hospital bed. In front of him is a notebook which he's left open on a page of what appears to be scribbles. But if you look closely, you'll actually see that it's an illustration of the infamous reverse bear trap. When we go on to see this trap in action, those who were able to link it to the image drawn by Kramer would be able to see that he's the one responsible. From there, they may even be able to recognize that the corpse in the room with Adam and Gordon is Kramer himself, though admittedly for the most part that would be really hard because he's just caked in blood. Anyway, if you managed to do this, you'd be able to solve the 2 biggest twists in the film by just seeing one important giveaway clue. 7. Black Swan. This 2010 psychological horror follows a very unstable ballerina, Nina, as she desperately pursues her dream role on the stage. One night, her good friend and also sort of enemy, Lily, takes her to a club and gets her all drugged up. Unsurprisingly, things start to go a bit crazy, and in a seizure-inducing mess of flashing lights and quick cuts, we watch as Nina begins to fall apart big time. It's hard to see clearly in real time, but if you slow down a certain sequence, we see things are slightly off. Nina begins morphing between being herself and being Lily. She splits into multiple versions of herself, and in the background, another Nina in her white swan costume appears and disappears. It's probably the most literal illustration of what is to come in the film. We've seen earlier as Nina sometimes suspects she's got doppelgangers or sees weird things in the mirror, but this is Nina losing her sense of self and the audience seeing multiple versions and sides of her all at the same time, and just like she is, being unsure of which is the real one. It's foreshadowed a million times throughout the film that despite what her teacher says, Nina will always become the Black Swan and that it will tear her apart. 6. Scream. Scream is one of the most quintessential horrors of the 90s, beloved for its contribution to the slasher subgenre and the endless inspiration it provides for Halloween costumes every year. Another cool thing about Scream, though, is that it wants us to speculate about the murderer, and drops us a million hints to let us know who's behind the murders before the big reveal. One fun example of this is when Sid and Billy are getting together and there's some quiet music playing in the background. If you weren't too distracted by what's going on in the foreground, you might recognize the track. It's the Blue Oyster Cult classic, Don't Fear the Reaper. This is a sneaky bit of foreshadowing. At the time, Sydney has no reason to fear Billy or suspect him at all, but only a short time after this track is played, she catches a glimpse of his phone and begins to suspect he may be to blame for the recent goings-on. It's pretty widely discussed that Billy is characterized in a way that makes it almost too obvious that he's the killer, killer, especially when Wes Craven throws in red herrings which eventually led some viewers to say, nah, it couldn't be him, that'd be too simple. It kind of feels like all the signs are right there. He's a psychopath that tries to guilt his mourning girlfriend into sleeping with him. He always knows where Sydney is just before she gets attacked, and he even gets identified by Randy, who we know knows his horror tropes inside out, as being the most likely killer. Given how meta some of the movie gets, you do have to take that one pretty seriously. Anyway, he's heartless and self-driven, and so it's really no surprise in the end when we find out for real that he's one of the men behind the masks, and the leading one at that. 5. The Thing. This one is a little tenuous because it doesn't necessarily give away the entire ending, but it's so bold and brash that it deserves a special mention. Right near the beginning of the film, we see a helicopter load of international scientists following a dog running through the snow. They shout and they shoot at the dog, but we don't know why straight away, as there's purposefully no subtitles to the speech. Well, it's safe to say that this little hint got ruined early for Norwegian speakers. Roughly translated, the scientists' warning as they open fire at the dog is as follows: "Get the hell away, that's not a dog, it's some sort of thing. It's imitating a dog, it isn't real, get away, you idiots." In that moment, right under our noses, or rather under our ears, the presence of an alien creature is given away, as well as its apparently evil nature and its ability to manipulate its own appearance to look like a more inconspicuous being. Whilst it doesn't allow for the audience to guess the entire plot with all its twists and turns, it does have to be said that the giveaway right at the beginning is a pretty fun Easter egg. 4. Hereditary. This movie has a bunch of hidden Easter eggs throughout, and for many this is what made Ari Aster's directorial debut so smart and so memorable. It also meant that a very perceptive type of viewer would be able to figure out where the film was going long before that mind-bending finale. In a scene showing Peter in his classroom, the discussion centers around the Greek tragedy of Heracles, including the undoing caused by the fatal flaw of willful ignorance, and the debate over whether it's more or less tragic if you never had any choice in your own downfall. When Annie finds her late mother's occult books and reads about Paimon, the predetermined destiny of the family becomes a little clearer, and it's Annie's own ignorance that allows it to happen. She clearly ignores about a million signs that her mother was in a satanic death cult and that something is really wrong. The seal of Paimon is everywhere, including the post that decapitates Charlie, and as each bit of the film plays out, the seal is present in every single major event in one way or another. Once Annie finds out about Paimon, it's pretty much all over. We know there's only one way the film can end, and that's with the predetermined fate of everybody. By then, everything is laid out on the path. All that you have to do now is to just walk down it. 3. Goodnight Mummy. Despite it being literally the central premise of the film, we never actually find out for sure whether the woman behind the bandages is the real mother or not. This, however, is made up for by another big reveal, that Lucas has been dead all along. But what if I told you this wasn't a reveal at all, and that you literally saw him die right at the start? In the very first scene, we see the two brothers out playing in the grass behind their house. They venture down to some water to go for a swim, and Elias is on a raft, but Lucas is not. Looking over the water, Elias calls Lucas's name, but all we see are some air bubbles rising up from underneath the water. He continues to call for his brother, but we never see the boy reappear out of the water. It's very possible that he drowned there and then. Witnessing his brother drown and being unable to save him would be incredibly traumatic for Elias, perhaps explaining why he goes on to hallucinate his brother's presence. Alternatively, people have read this scene as a clear illustration of Lucas already being dead and just a hallucination. Throughout the film, you don't really see him come and go and disappear like a ghost. However, in this scene, he's just suddenly disappeared. Some fans think that's because at this point he's already dead, and it's a signal to us that he was never there in the first place, even as Elias was calling out his name. 2. The Cornetto Trilogy. Now, we couldn't really dedicate 3 whole entries to these films, but they do all deserve a mention. It's a shared characteristic that all of these films give away their ending, or at least heavily foreshadow it, within the first half. Shaun of the Dead is absolutely rife with foreshadowing and funny ways of describing exactly what's going to happen in the film. One of the best examples of this is when Ed spells out the entire plot of the film whilst comforting Shaun in the pub. He spells out his plan for the evening to Shaun, starting with a Bloody Mary first thing, referring to the zombie called Mary they kill in the backyard. A bite at the King's Head, referring to Philip getting unfortunately chomped. Next up, a couple at the Little Princess, meaning David, Dee and Liz. And finally, stagger back here, back at the bar for shots, referring to how they pretend to be zombies to get back to the Winchester and then use the Winchester's gun to fend off the undead. In Hot Fuzz, amongst plenty of other clever hints, the Chief Inspector literally gives away that he's a bad guy in conversation with Nicholas. Angel points out that he can't just make people disappear, to which he replies, "Of course I can. I'm the Chief Inspector." Finally, the world's end. The most popular bit of foreshadowing in this film is the names of the pubs and how they foretell what happens in each. The Old Familiar sees the gang meet up with an old friend. The Cross Hands sees the first encounter with the Blanks, who use their hands as weapons. Even the Hole in the Wall sees Stephen literally drive into the wall of the pub to rescue his friends. Another interesting thing though that I missed on my first watch is that all of the Blanks wear blue, including those who are destined to become Blanks later in the film. Finally, number 1, Midsommar. We all know that Ari Aster likes to go heavy on symbolism and hidden messages, and Midsommar was absolutely no exception. Only Aster could get away with showing a tapestry depicting the entire plot of the film right at the start. Panel by panel, the artwork shows the events starting from the death of Danny's family right through to the end of the film, where all of her friends are dead, including boyfriend Christian, and she goes on to dance and feast with the community. There's even a little reference to that horrible cliff jumping scene. The murals throughout the film detail everything, it seems, from a crowned girl caressing a kind of surprised looking bear, the beast being burned, and even an image of the mating ritual hanging above Christian's bed, foretelling what he's gonna do. As things go on, the whole plot can be pieced together just by looking at the art, but it can also be so easily overlooked in terms of the actual messages because the aesthetic blends so easily into the Scandinavian setting. Once again, Ari Aster has given away the ending, but made it smart enough that we have to work for it. And that brings us to the end of our list of 8 horror films that give away their own endings. If you've got any more good examples of this, then let us know in the comments down below, and remember to check out whatculture.com for more lists and articles like this every day. I've been Amy from What Culture, and in the spirit of things, I'm gonna go buy myself a Cornetto.